the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
I've been preparing for this all my life.
Here's Porter on Harden, taking him to school. What a great play by Jayshawn Tate. K.J. Martin climbed Bobon Mountain.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
And you've seen tonight that we fought together, we stayed together, and it's about damn time, man.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rockets, the best and only daily podcast covering your Houston Rockets. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and partner at Apollo Media, all Houston, all original. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, as well as at Apollo HOU. And if you enjoy what we do here, be sure to subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel, as well as wherever you listen to your podcasts. Now, this episode is brought to you by Locker Room. Download the app and join myself and the Athletic's Alykhan Bijani each week live to get in on the action. Locker Room, changing the way that we talk sports. And joining us today by way of the Locker Room app is none other than the man, the myth, the legend himself, Nets insider, Alykhan Bijani. What you got for me, Alykhan?
Nets insider. Oh my God. Are we getting carried away with that? I think we're getting a little too carried away with that.
Okay. All right. I'll stop with the Nets insider stuff.
If I get a chance to cover that team, we'll see. But for now, we still sticking with just the Rockets.
Well, we've got a really loaded show here today, and the reason for that is we're going to talk in a moment. We're going to kind of reflect on Kevin Porter Jr.'s season, look back on how things kind of started for him. We're going to even take a jump back look at the G League, his transition to the NBA game, what we liked, what we didn't like, just kind of all of that, all encompassing. But first, right here off the top, we just both finished watching a masterclass performance by Kevin Durant, the Brooklyn Nets, James Harden, who had a pretty rough game. We're just going to omit the James Harden game, the hamstring game. In fact, I guess that's what we're going to have to call this one. But what's your first immediate reaction to watching Kevin Durant pour in 49 points and secure this win in the pivotal Game 5 against the Bucks?
What's really interesting, obviously he scored a lot whenever he had the ball in his hands and kind of initiating offense for himself, whether it was through isolation, just kind of knocking down some dead-eye shots, or just high screen and roll. Blake Griffin sending a screen really high, he attacking Brook Lopez in the paint and scoring. But what really impressed me was how he chose his spots. He played 48 minutes, and then at the same time, not only did he play that entire game, but he conserved his energy for when his team needed it at the most, which was the end of each quarter. You saw in the end of the first, especially that second is starting in towards the end, that third towards the end, and then the fourth quarter as well. He picked his correct spots to be able to take over the game. And not just with the ball in his hands, but also off the ball as well. They really utilized his ability to screen, be an off-ball screener, open up shots for Joe Harris, Landry Shamet, Jeff Green. He had some sensational passes, which we saw in his 10 assists tonight as well. I think he and James, after that rough kind of where they were rushing things offensively in the first half, they got it going, and they were able to kind of take advantage of the mismatches they wanted to. You basically saw what it felt like to watch the Rockets a few seasons ago when there was obviously a lot more movement today with the Nets, but you saw what it was like to have two superstars kind of dictate the tempo and pace of the game. If you're a Rockets fan, and that's what we saw a lot of tonight. Just a masterful, all-time great performance by Kevin Durant. This possibly could be his greatest individual performance, and it's already up there as one of the best individual performances in the history of the NBA. No other person has had that stat line, played the full 48 minutes, and kind of just where his team was start the game and to kind of end the way they did. Terrific, fantastic performance.
Again, if you didn't catch the game, Kevin Durant was truly elite in this one, as Alykhan already mentioned, played every single minute of this game, had 49 points, 17 rebounds, 10 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks on 16 of 23 shooting, 4 of 9 from behind the arc, 13 of 16 at the line. This is not a Brooklyn Nets podcast. This is not even a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, but this is a podcast that appreciates elite, beautiful, sensational basketball. And that's exactly what Kevin Durant had in this game. Now, on the flip side, Alykhan, we had James Harden, who made his debut, well, not really his debut in the series. He played, 17 seconds before, but comes back from the hamstring injury, probably being rushed back a little bit. does not look like himself, does not have the same burst, the explosiveness. It looks like he's moving.
He can't do what he wants to do.
Not whatsoever. They utilized him, largely as a decoy in this one, right? And I think that was at least still effective to an extent for what the Nets were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, when it comes to James, what you like him to do, especially when he's on the perimeter, is probe. He can still do that even in a state where he is a lot more stationary within the offense. He was kind of like their high post quarterback. And what I mean by that, he was initiating the offense from the high post and the perimeter, never really getting going other than a few possessions where he attacked off the pick and roll to kind of keep his defender honest. But more so, it was just, him making correct reads, making correct passes, and making a lot of hockey assists. I think he had 7 assists tonight. He probably had a numerous number of hockey assists as well. Just getting his team in the right spots. Another ball handler to bring the ball up the court, to give Kevin Durant some time off. And just to basically, like I said, allow you to get into the flow and the rhythm of the offense that you want. Defensively, I'm surprised that Milwaukee did not attack him as much as they should have done, honestly. A lot of people will make a big deal that, about Giannis kind of taking a fadeaway over James, rightfully so. But where I think the Milwaukee messed up on the most was that they weren't really attacking James on help defense. Giannis and other players, they can get by Blake Griffin or Jeff Green, if they do it multiple times. There's going to be numerous possessions like that. Now, if you're doing that consistently, James Harden's going to be the one who's camping the lane, trying to kind of help, not to help, kind of, stunt one way, stunt the other. He's not going to help as effectively as you would like to. I don't think he's playing at full strength, obviously. You can see that whenever he's trying to kind of attack off and plant off that right foot, he's unable to do so that effectively. But I think Game 6 is going to come down to, can Milwaukee really attack James and hurt him defensively, not as a one-on-one defender. James can hold his own, even if he's hobbled a little bit, but attack him as a help defender. Because that's one area where if you are hobbled, you're going to struggle. You're not able to get into the same rotations if you're moving side to side.
Continuing on here at Locked On Nets, your daily podcast on all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. No, okay. No, I mean, it's one of those games where, we were preoccupied with it. We wanted to focus on it. James Harden made his true debut in this series, and he is, the franchise player for the Rockets. And to me, that's a little bit relevant news as to what's going on. I mean, we bumped our usual time slot back an entire hour on this Tuesday evening live via the Locker Room app because we both wanted to kind of partake and watch this game a little bit. And look, at the end of the day, I've already, aired my piece on this, Alykhan. I don't know where you're at with this, but I'm pulling for James Harden to win a title. If it comes down to him or Chris Paul, if it's a Nets Suns finals, whatever. I will be distraught, but I will be happy that one of them, and then as well as Mike D'Antoni, walks away with a ring. But I'm not sure where you're at on this. Are you, as somebody who's covered the team as thoroughly as you have, where is your head at when you're looking at James Harden and how this season happened, how he forced his way out of Houston, and how he's progressing now with the Brooklyn Nets?
I've always looked at James as one of the smartest players in the league. It's a joy to watch him play the game, and especially when he's healthy, kind of dictate the pace, the tempo, break down, dissect the defense. Honestly, I don't really have any rooting interests in these playoffs, but I will say you want to watch the best basketball you can. So I want James to be healthy. I want CP to be healthy. I want all these guys to be healthy so we can actually see this great basketball. I think all the coaches who are left here in the Western Conference playoffs are fantastic coaches. They're good at making adjustments. They're good with the X's and O's. You just want quality basketball, and that's all I'm rooting for. That game tonight, that was quality basketball. It was really fun to watch.
Well, we do have, again, this is Locked on Rockets, and we're going to talk about Kevin Porter Jr. We're going to kind of reflect on his season because that's what this episode was initially going to be entirely about. But again, we had to dedicate a little bit of time to just kind of react and kind of bask in what was some really amazing, intense playoff basketball between two of the best teams in the league in the Brooklyn Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks. So coming up, we're going to start on our Kevin Porter Jr. reflection, looking back at his season, trying to figure out where things, maybe need to improve, what we did like out of him, all that good stuff, after a quick message from our friends over at, you guessed it, Locker Room. Because, hey, Locker Room is the first social audio platform that is made for sports fans. The app is free to download, and once you're in, you can talk with me, you can talk with other fans, athletes, and insiders in real time about your favorite team or sport. So you can come in and chat with us right here like you're doing right now. Hang out in the chat, jump up on stage, all that good stuff. So go download the free Locker Room app, and it's on all iOS devices. It's available on Android in beta testing right now. Grab the app, create an account, follow me at JT Gatlin, follow Alykhan at Rockets_insider. I don't think he's changed it to Nets Insider quite just yet. So it's still Rockets_insider on the Locker Room app. So follow us, check us out every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. Locker Room, changing the way that we talk sports. Now, continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball and sometimes Brooklyn Nets and Milwaukee Bucks basketball. Alykhan, when we look at Kevin Porter Jr. and where he came from, let's reflect. Let's go all the way back to when the news first broke that we had the Cleveland Cavaliers had Kevin Porter Jr. There was the locker room incident. They gave away his locker. He had the breakdown, I guess. I mean, he was distraught. He was upset. Did not look good for the Cleveland Cavaliers organization. Didn't look good for Kevin Porter Jr. Obviously, a change of scenery was going to be needed, and the Rockets were the team that took a flyer on him, with most people saying that the Rockets, quote unquote, got KPJ for free because they basically gave a top 55 protected second round draft pick that's never going to convey for him. What was your reaction when the Rockets actually acquired Kevin Porter Jr.?
Not making a comparison based off of personality or based off of skill level talent, but this started making me feel like this was back in like 2009, 2010, 2011, when you're Daryl Morey and you're getting guys like a Jordan Hill or a Terrence Williams or somebody you're taking a flyer on to see can they live up to the potential that they had going into that draft. Kevin Porter Jr., I think, is somebody with a lot of skill. I think that's one thing I've learned a lot covering him so far this season. When you talk to a lot of these guys on opposing teams, the first thing they mention is the word skill. He has a lot of skill. He has a lot of good game in him. He's one of those few players as a rookie or as a young player, as a sophomore now, who can really play at his own tempo, dictate his own tempo, kind of leverage his timing and his speed to his advantage. And that's a skill. That doesn't just come with natural ability. That takes time to develop, and he's definitely worked on that, and along with kind of his natural innate talents as well. But he is somebody that the Rockets really do like. They want to continue to give more time to see how he can function as a lead ball handler, and that's something to me that has surprised me the most. Is not just that the fact that they've put him in that position. I think that was expected. But the fact that he's grown so much in this short period of time, with all the game experience, but going from the G League to playing in an NBA season or playing in the second half of the season and having that role, especially with and without John Wall. Now, that's not easy for a young player. You're learning a role where they want you to be a ball handler, but you're having to play alongside the team's actual lead ball handler. And that takes an adjustment. And whenever John Wall's not playing, it also takes an adjustment in how to kind of shift your role and go back to being that lead ball handler as well. And so, he's definitely impressed me in some ways, and there are ways where you see this guy's only a sophomore. He has a lot to grow up in terms of his game. He will get to over the course of his career. But a lot of positives to take away if you're a Rockets fans after the season from Kevin Porter Jr.
And I think too, I look back on, when the trade first happened, and obviously the Rockets season kind of started spiraling out of control pretty quickly, getting to the point where we were more excited to watch Vipers games than we were to watch actual Rockets games, that was a mood about halfway through the season, man. Those were some dark times. But thankfully, yeah, Kevin Porter Jr. was a light during those trying times. And I remember sitting down during the All-Star break when I did a show with Rockets courtside reporter Kaylee Griffin, who is phenomenal, amazing interview. If you haven't checked out that episode, go back and listen to it. A lot of it's mostly focusing on her and her career journey, as well as, her role with the Rockets. So it's still kind of relevant. It's kind of a timeless interview. One of the favorite people that I've ever had on the pod. And she highlighted her relationship with Lindsey Gottlieb of the Cleveland Cavaliers organization and how highly she spoke of Kevin Porter Jr. and how, she truly believed that he was just such a good kid, a good soul, and just maybe needed to change the scenery, just, needed to get his head right. And it seems like, at least right now with the Rockets organization, they've been able to achieve that. John Lucas has been instrumental in that front, really trying to provide that mentorship element to Kevin Porter Jr., both just what he can mentor him with as being, a great ex-player in John Lucas, but also just somebody who is kind of a spiritual leader for many players throughout the NBA in John Lucas. And so I think this situation was honestly a match made in heaven for Kevin Porter Jr. He's able to step into an organization that has time for him to, kind of plug him in and say, hey, we trust you. We want to give you the ball. We want to, kind of give you the keys to an extent, like you said, when John Wall's not out there. And let him really grow and play his game. And I mean, he had a really, really, really productive stint with the Rockets. We look at his numbers for the season, and Kevin Porter Jr. averaged 16.6 points per game, 3.8 rebounds, 6.3 assists, hair under 43% from the floor, and then little over 31% from the 3-point line. And Alykhan, I know that that's going to be an area that you and I are going to both harp on, is his 3-point shooting, but there's nothing like mechanically wrong with his shot. It's just for whatever reason, he just had a really hard time getting the 3 ball to fall this time around.
I also, it may not be a mechanical thing as much as it needs to be more of a rhythm and kind of getting the reps in and seeing the ball go through. When I've talked to different scouts who have watched Kevin Porter Jr., they think that he will eventually become a good 3-point shooter. He just needs to continue to work on that aspect of his game. One thing I want to key in on that I think John Lucas is really going to help him a lot with is his ability to play alongside another ball handler. Now, why is that conversation important for Rockets fans? Well, you're likely going to have John Wall here next season. You're likely going to have Eric Gordon here next season. And if that's the case and you get a top 4 draft pick, as many Rockets fans are hoping for, there's a very good possibility you can get another ball handler or shot creator or scorer here as well. That's another person that's going to take the ball out of Kevin Porter Jr.'s hands. He has to learn how well he can play with others. I do think for him that he only did play in those limited games alongside John Wall, but the thing that gives me confidence that they can work out is the fact that John Wall was a much better catch and shoot 3-point percentage shooter than he was on pull-ups. And if you give the ball in Kevin Porter Jr.'s hand, allow him to continue to develop, make those primary, secondary, tertiary, advanced level reads as he is capable of making, he can get to that level where he can get John Wall open. He can play off of John Wall as well and get to those spots. That's one thing I actually asked Stephen Salas as we headed towards the end of the season is, how good is he in a point guard? And he mentioned the fact that he can already make those types of reads, those advanced level reads that you see. There's been passes we've discussed previously in Locked On Rockets film room that he's made. That's him looking at the weak side player, looking at the help side player, and then based off of using his eyes and his vision, being able to create a passing lane for his teammate. That's stuff that's going to continue to get better and better over time, and which should give you more confidence that he can really become a good playmaker for this team.
I would argue almost, Alykhan, that it's not that he's, that he has the potential to become a good playmaker for this team, that he already is a good playmaker, right? But that he has almost an upward ceiling, a potential ceiling of being an elite playmaker in the top, percentages of the league. You look at per cleaning the glass, KPJ ranked in the 91st percentile of assist percentage amongst playmakers in the NBA, amongst other combo guards. So, amongst the likes of, the James Hardens of the league, right? James Harden ranks in the 99th percentile. So Kevin Porter Jr. not too far behind, generating shots for roughly about 30% of his teammates per cleaning the glass. So, I mean, you look at that and you mentioned just the difficulty, some of the passes that he was able to create, the ways that he was breaking down defenses and finding his teammates. I think that his ceiling really, the scoring is there, right? And we talked about the 3-point shooting, and I do want to mention that Ron chimed in the chat on Locker Room saying that he thinks sometimes the 3-point shooting might be balance related. And I think that's a pretty solid observation, that sometimes KPJ doesn't quite get his footing underneath him or get his shoulders completely squared up going into a shot. But really the playmaking is the element that I think for both of us probably stands out the most from Kevin Porter Jr. And when you look at the Rockets team and how they're trying to build, there's a conversation that a good friend of the podcast, Karthik Prasad, likes to bring up on Twitter quite often, and it's become a little bit of a buzzword lately. So I want to pick your brains on this. The term engine of an offense, when it comes to an NBA team. And it feels like this term gets thrown around Rockets Twitter a lot. We, called James Harden the engine of the Mike D'Antoni offense, and the ball, all the actions run through him, all that stuff. Do you view Kevin Porter Jr. as the type of player who can be an engine of an NBA offense, or do you think that's a bad word or phrase to throw around?
I don't think it's a bad word or phrase, because if you want to be an elite offensive team, you need to have an engine or multiple parts of an engine. Just complete honesty, I don't know yet if Kevin Porter Jr. is capable of becoming, or not, I wouldn't say capable. I don't know if he is the type of player who can or will be an engine of an offense. He's still really young. He has a lot to show me to be able to get to that point. I think, like I said earlier, he is somebody who can dictate and play to his pace, play to his tempo, which will allow him to be a good offensive player in the league for a long time. The question can be, can he make not only himself but his teammates better, right? And so for me, that's going to come down to, can he make those reads consistently? Can he balance between being a scorer and also being a passer as well? We look at the Milwaukee game where he took advantage of mismatches and attacked, or not even mismatches, he just took advantage of the defenders that he put him against. Or if he got the switch against bigger guys, he's kind of scored on. By the same time, he read the defense when he saw people shooting towards him, he made the right pass. That has to become a consistent thing where he is able to not only score, but have a balance between passing, scoring, getting his teammates involved, and reading the game. He's just not there yet for me to say that he is capable of being an engine. Like I said, that's not me saying that he's never going to get there. Very possible he can be. Just right now, I haven't seen enough for me to say that he can get there relatively quickly.
That's fair. I mean, we have, less than a 30-game sample size of him in a Rockets jersey. It'll be much more evident kind of what the timeline of his progression is going to be after getting at least one more season as a Houston Rocket under his belt, hopefully with another top 4 prospect alongside him, which is actually a topic that I want to bring up here in just a second. I don't want to bring up the issue of necessarily I don't want to get too draft oriented, but I do have a question that I want to pose to you about the fit and the kind of roster construction involving Kevin Porter Jr. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar. Now, look, if you've never had a protein bar, I should have grabbed my Built Bars. They're right over there. They're like 3 feet away from me on the counter, and I could flash them on the camera because we are also now on YouTube, which is super cool. So I should have had the visual element. I'm slacking on the YouTube side of things, but Built Bar, it's the best protein bar on the market. And the reason why, because they're protein bars that don't taste like protein bars. They're basically candy bars that are jam-packed with protein. They've got so many amazing flavors to choose from: coconut, almond, raspberry, mint chocolate brownie, peanut butter brownie. My personal favorite, the coconut brownie chunk. Can't go wrong with any of them. They're all low-cal, low-sugar, high-protein, high-fiber. Amazing if you're on a keto diet. And you can check them out. Just go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to receive a 15% discount on your very next order. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON for 15% off at BuiltBar.com.
I was trying to show myself rubbing my stomach as if like, oh, that sounds really good. But the camera angle won't let me get there. It's okay.
Hey, well, you know what? Built Bar, I appreciate Alykhan, and Built Bar appreciates it. Now, here's the twist, right? Is can you figure out something to do to illustrate Bet Online? Because that's the next message that I've got is we got to talk about Bet Online. Which, there we go.
Oh. This better not turn into a GIF. I know this is going to turn into a GIF.
It's absolutely going to turn into a GIF. This is great. This is the greatest ad read I've ever done in my life. But Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. We got baseball season in full swing. NBA playoffs are here. We just had the masterclass performance from Kevin Durant in the Brooklyn Nets victory against the Milwaukee Bucks. You also got NHL, UFC, MMA, you name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. So don't sit on the sidelines anymore. It's time to get in on the action. Use promo code LOCKEDON and you will receive a 50% welcome bonus on your very first deposit. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON for a 50% welcome bonus on your very first deposit. That's BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. And we are rolling into our final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Quick reminder that today on our road to the finals, our NBA playoffs coverage is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. And at 2.6 carbs and 95 calories, we can all enjoy the games just a little bit more this season. Or, hey, maybe enjoy Michelob Ultra while you're watching the draft lottery, which somebody asked earlier. I'm going to be doing something live in some capacity for that. I don't know what yet, but we're doing something with Locked On. It's definitely going to involve me and Rylan Stiles from Locked On Thunder, because one of us is going to be extremely happy come draft lottery night, and one of us is going to be very, very sad. And if the Rockets lose their pick, you might see me cry like live on stream, which is going to be awful, but that'll be gift worthy if it happens. Now, Alykhan, the question that I kind of had for you, and I want to get your take on this. When I look at the construction of a team, and a team that really wants to build towards something great and have championship aspirations, and I'm kind of basing this a little bit on the model of the 2017-2018 Rockets team, which I know that I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole. There's been a lot of discourse on Rockets Twitter about that team. We're not going to do that, but I do have to reference that team in the sense that, one, James Harden's defensive deficiencies have largely been overblown. He had the one, defensive collapse montage that went viral, and everybody thought he was a terrible defender. I will admit, and I'm sure you can too, that there were plenty of times that he would, fall asleep on defense or take a play or two off. And that's totally, it's a bit understandable for star players to do that. But when he needed to be locked in, final possession of the game, crunch time, great post defender, all those things, a lot of the time, media wouldn't give James Harden his credit. But you still look at James Harden and call him maybe a neutral defender, or at times a net negative defender. And it really felt like that 2017-2018 team for the Rockets did a phenomenal job of putting a bunch of plus defenders around James Harden. You had Chris Paul, plus defender, Trevor Ariza, plus defender, PJ Tucker, plus defender, Clint Capella, plus defender. So when I look at Kevin Porter Jr., and I look at the fact that he does struggle defensively, not nearly as much as a young James Harden perhaps, but I don't know if he's necessarily ever going to be a plus defender. I worry from a roster construction standpoint that you need to try and put other capable plus defenders around him if he is a long-term piece of the Rockets' future. And that's why I'm still currently higher on Jalen Suggs than I am Jalen Green, because I view Jalen Green as another guy who's potentially a defensive liability fit in that backcourt. And so if you try to line those two guys up together, even though the offensive ceiling for Jalen Green is through the roof, I'm a little worried about the defense. Should I be that concerned? How do you feel about that take?
Yeah, I don't think that it's the wrong take to have, especially after what we witnessed this season. A couple of areas where I would like to see Kevin Porter Jr. improve. Number one, transition. You're going for a three-point shot, and the guy who's closing out on you is like, oh my God, he's attempting the three-point shot. He's going to, look at his follow through. I'm just going to leak out in transition. I know other teams do it to other players as well. This is not something that's just for Kevin Porter Jr. But it happens way too many times for it to not be on the scouting report against him, that he needs to stop looking at his follow-through and just sitting and sometimes just kind of shaking his head and needs to get back on the play and play some transition defense. That's number one. Number two, he's actually a good, in times, or more times than not, good isolation defender. And I have the numbers in front of me. I'm going to read them out to the folks who are listening and also watching to us right now. 83rd percentile in isolation, 84th percentile surprisingly in pick and roll. And the reason why I say surprisingly is because a guy like Kevin Porter Jr., you wouldn't ordinarily think he's a good pick and roll defender, but the reason why he's so successful is because he has these kind of lengthy arms that allow him to maneuver around screens well. If he has enough talent around him that he can not only be a focal point of the offense, but also play defensive, I think he's somebody who can play and excel at drop coverage. And I think that also speaks, that percentile also speaks to how well Christian Wood developed that second half of the season as a drop big, as well as Kelly Olynyk, and kind of the job Kelly Olynyk did defending bigs inside the paint as well. If Kevin Porter Jr. can kind of keep that up, and they can continue to add more layers to the defensive scheme, I think Kevin Porter Jr. can be a serviceable defender in terms of their base coverage and also in switching that they need to do. An area where I am looking at further improvement from him is as a help defender. And what I mean by that is, for example, if I'm an opposing team, I have Kevin Porter Jr. On my corner three-point shooter in whatever, left or right corner, I'm going to try to bring him up to set a screen and attack him in space. Or I'm going to try to attack and pick and roll and dive towards the rim and force him to be able to help on that lob or force him to be able to help on that pass. If you're an opposing team, you always like to pick on you like to pick on Kevin Porter Jr. not only on the ball, but especially off the ball as well. He needs to fix that heading into next season and the rest of his career.
So if we're going to each have a takeaway here for Kevin Porter Jr. and the thing that he needs to improve the most going in next season, I'm going to go first because I think mine's a bit of a cop-out because it's kind of a simple one, but it is the area that I think that once he further develops this skill, it'll unlock so much more of the rest of his game. And that's got to be getting that consistent three-point shot, right? If he can work on that over this offseason, get that three-point shot up to a more reliable percentage, I'm thinking, again, that 35, 36 mark, he can create his own shot. He's got the step back. It's very James Harden-esque. If he's able to get that three-point percentage a little bit higher, it's going to unlock the rest of his driving game. It'll unlock his ability to thrive even more so than he already has in the pick and roll. It'll continue to unlock things for his teammates. And the most important thing, as you illustrated earlier, is there's a very big chance that John Wall is still wearing a Houston Rockets jersey next season. And if he is, and if maybe the Rockets walk away with a Cade Cunningham, fingers crossed, knock on wood, in the draft, then KPJ needs to be able to play off ball. And I think that was an area that we revisited, early on, or not early on, in an earlier episode talking about Kevin Porter Jr. His numbers when his usage rate is through the roof versus when his usage rate is the lowest it's a stark comparison. Like his numbers drop off a cliff when his usage rate plummets. And that's maybe it's a rhythm thing, maybe it's a confidence thing. But I think a big part of that and a big proponent of that was some of the games where he played more so off ball to John Wall, who was commanding more of the ball, operating things, running the offense through him. KPJ just didn't have the rhythm, didn't have the confidence, all of that. And so that's another thing that he needs to work on. So maybe even as an extension of his three-point shot, maybe it's just his confidence overall, because we saw so many times he's so animated when he messes something up, when he misses a shot, he gets so down on himself that and I know that the coaching staff is there encouraging him. His teammates are trying to lift him up, but he strikes me as the kind of guy that just gets so in his own head at times that it's very detrimental to his play. Good point about the shooting. For me, the area I'm going to look at the most is his ability to impact the game when he does not have the ball. And that goes into having the ball in terms of his confidence, but more so how can he dictate the tempo and the pace of the game as he can, as well as he does when he has the ball, but except when he doesn't have the ball. Can he move around the screens effectively? Can he set pin downs? Can he do the proper spacing that needs to be done? When he gives up the ball, can he relocate to a proper place where the ball handler who has the ball has more space to drive inside and kind of continue to play off the ball like we just talked about here? How can he impact the game in ways besides having the ball in his hands? I think he's a good knockdown three-point shooter. He's really good at coming off of pin downs. That's one thing the Rockets have really tried to implement with him, is coming off those little pin downs and curls, those dribble handoffs either with Kelly Olynyk and Christian Wood, and getting him the ball on the run. He's really good at that because he's able to maneuver and contort his body really well with his pace and ability to kind of just levitate in the air when he needs to get a shot up, but also because he has the ability to hit a mid-range shot. That's something that he hit at a really good percentage this season that I'm eager to see him continue to do moving forward. But it all comes down to he has to make sure he has a good balance of play and knows when to pick his spots. That's something young players take a couple of years to develop. I'm not expecting him to be an expert or elite at it next season. I would just like to see him take that next step forward in terms of being able to do those certain things. It's definitely going to be exciting to see Kevin Porter Jr. continue to develop as a Houston Rocket, and we are going to have you covered for all of that and more, as always, here at Locked on Rockets. But that is going to do it for today's episode. If you're in the locker room with us, hang tight, sit there. We've got Locked on Rockets After Dark coming up in just a moment. But for today's episode, that is going to do it. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Check out the new YouTube channel. Subscribe there. We've got tons of amazing content coming out. I just had an interview with Rockets legend Virgin Maxwell. We might have another Rockets legend coming on the show very, very soon. I'm working on it. I got a lot of little irons in the fire right now. But for today's episode, that is going to do it. As always, thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.